What's up everyone, welcome to the video. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my favorite and best things to do when warming up for a sprint or speed training session. These are little tips and tricks that you can do in your warm-up and they'll actually help you get faster in your 40, 60 or whatever race you're running today actually. I want to preface this by saying I know that sounds pretty crazy. Like you're going to get faster without really training, you're just doing a warm-up. And I definitely attribute these tips and tricks to getting myself a little bit faster, as well as athletes that I've given this warm-up to, and especially the ordering. I feel like that is kind of one of the big keys in this as well, and I'll kind of go over that later. But I attribute this stuff to taking tenths off of my own as well as other athletes 40 and 60 times. So having said all that, let's just get right into it. Okay, so thinking about the warm-up, one thing I like to group in with the warm-up, and something that not a lot of people really think about, is actually shoe wear. A lot of people don't really understand what shoes they should be wearing when they run a race or a 40-yard dash. Believe it or not, your shoes have a pretty big impact on your performance. A lot of people believe that you want to wear cushiony, broken in, worn in shoes, and honestly, this is just totally wrong. Those cushion, worn in, broken in shoes, what they're doing is they're absorbing force with every impact, with every foot strike, and that's something you don't want. You want to be able to generate as much force as you can. So when looking for sneakers or looking for shoes to run in, look for sneakers with a hard sole, or I tell guys to get track waffles. And then lastly, when it comes to footwear, you want them tight. I see this too often where guys are running and their shoes are flopping around, they're too big, they're a size too big.
Miller has only one sneaker on. Miller, bang!
Their shoes are flying off. That's absolutely ridiculous. You do not want that to happen, especially during a race. It just will not help you. It's going to make you run slower, just plain and simple. You just want to make sure your shoes are tied tight. Even if they're a little tighter than normal, make sure there's no room in the shoe. If you have to go a half size smaller, I recommend that you do that. What you want to do is cram your foot into the shoe if you can. What happens is when you run, your toes make like this clawing motion, and if they're jammed in, they're jammed at the top and the front part of the sneaker, then they're gonna be in the optimal position for grabbing the ground as your foot hits the ground. So now the warm-up. I like to talk about the warm-up in kind of a different way as most people or coaches like to talk about it. You're probably a team sports athlete and you're familiar with a warm-up as in, you probably do it with your whole team. It's just like a cookie cutter thing. You probably start off with like a jog or something, and then you go right into stretching. And this whole collective group approach is good. It's good for being in a team, but when it comes to a training session, when it comes to you, the individual actually getting better, I like to take a more professionalist type of approach. Actually, I think that the warm-up is something that I shouldn't be telling you how to warm up. You should be warming up in a way that holds you accountable for the task or the training session that you have ahead of you. The whole basis of a warm-up is to prepare you for what you're about to do. And I don't care if that's a training session, you're gonna run a 40-yard dash at a combine or a 60-yard dash at a showcase. You just want to be prepared for whatever you have to do. That's the whole basis of the warm-up. It's almost like the warm-up is kind of like a construct. It's not supposed to be like one cookie cutter, just flat out thing that you do every single time mindlessly. You wanna kind of take note of how your body feels while you're doing it and apply what you know, what you learn, to warming yourself up in order to prepare yourself to enhance your performance. So the first thing I do is a dynamic warm-up. And what I like to think of the dynamic warm-up as is a way for you to get your heart rate up and start getting a sweat going, as well as give yourself an opportunity to really think about your task, think about your training session, start to take note when you move around, what feels tight, what feels restricted, so you know when you go on to step 2, which is mobility, that you know what to kind of hammer for mobility so you could clear those restrictions for your training session. Think of it as like you're kind of going through a checklist. how does each body part feel, especially the body parts that you're training that day. Go through, give yourself like a whole body scan and just think about how you want to feel during your training session.
Flexing my glute, flexing my hamstring, flexing my glute, flexing my hamstring. Believe it or not, every pose that you're going to do in 2 weeks on stage will start from the floor up. So by learning how to plant your foot and learning how to be able to flex your hamstring and your glute is going to be critical for every pose you do, not only from the rear, but on your 3/4 and side poses. Other people may see you from a distance and think you're just walking on the step mill. But what you're going to need to learn how to do is turn the most average things into tools that are going to help you be your best the day of competition.
So to give you an example, let's say I'm training squats this day, and you guessed it, I'm gonna start off with bodyweight squats. Odds are if something feels weird doing a bodyweight squat, it's not gonna get better under load. A lot of people like to start with doing the stationary bike, Stairmaster, treadmill, elliptical, whatever, just to get a sweat going. And that I think is totally fine too. This is your warm-up. You gotta do whatever you gotta do in order to feel good going into the next step. And I just don't really do that. I do the movements I know that are gonna be required in my training session, almost do like a mini circuit through them. For a sprint training session or a prep to run a 40 or 60, a dynamic warm-up might look like lunges, banded walks, Frankensteins, leg swings, going to A skips, B skips, and then finishing off with striders. What's important is the ordering here. You also go from slow to fast and from most simple to complex. I think that's also a key that you want to keep in mind. It's just a good way to warm up your body. And I hate using this word, but it gets your body acclimated. It gets your body acclimated to the movement you're about to perform. As for effort considerations, I tell my athletes to build up to about 80% of max effort on the last part of the dynamic warm-up. You don't want to be going full throttle just yet. Also, here's a pro tip. Use exercises or movements that really challenge your body in the dynamic warm-up. Like for squatting, I like to recommend athletes to start with doing something that challenges a lot of their mobility, which is like overhead squats. Not a lot of athletes can perform a really good overhead squat. And I think when you do an overhead squat, you kind of get to see where your body breaks down. And that's kind of a good thing. You want to be able to see what is restricting you the most for doing your main task. It's almost like taking the most extreme degree of movement that you could possibly use, because you know that you're not gonna come close to using that type of movement in a training session. But if you do that and you try to work towards perfecting that movement, odds are the shape that you're gonna try to make in your actual training session is gonna be perfect. So essentially all that is just a big diagnostic for step 2. And for me, that's mobility. Mobility is something we all need to do, we all need to work on. We should probably work on it daily. It's something that is just improves our performance, like plain and simple. And mobility is from here is easy because you did step 1, so you know where you're restricted. It's almost like it's laid out for you already. You know where you're tight, you know where you're restricted. Just hit the mobilizations that are gonna clear those restrictions and you're gonna be gold. So if you did step 1 properly and thought about it, this should probably be kind of easy for you. For someone who's doing a sprint training session, you're probably gonna be tight in your hips, you're probably gonna be tight in your ankles or lack a little dorsiflexion, and you may be tight in your hamstrings too. That's also a good place to mobilize to make sure you don't pull your hamstring. I'll usually do like 3 to 4 mobilizations. Sometimes I'll do more, sometimes I'll do less though. But I'll do them for like 2 minutes a side or 2 minutes of body part. And usually I'll try to use the ones that give me the most bang for my buck or hit the most areas that I am restricted in. So my favorite mobilizations for you, if you're doing a sprint or a speed training session, sprinting requires a great deal of hip flexion, hip extension, ankle dorsiflexion. You want to do banded hip extension, banded hip flexion. I think those two are great. The couch stretch is really good, especially if you have tight quads like myself, who does a lot of squatting. Banded ankle dorsiflexion and banded ankle like calf mobilizations I think also are good. I also usually do the foam roller on my calves because they get tight every once in a while too. But those 5-6 things are probably like where you're gonna get the most bang for your buck in terms of improving your performance sprinting. Will all help improve your positioning, increase the amount of torque you can produce, and help prevent injury, especially the banded hip flexion. I used that one when I pulled my hamstring a few years back, and it has helped me a great deal. So I definitely recommend that one if you are someone who has a history of pulled hamstrings. Lastly, step number 3 is to excite your nervous system. I like to come back after I do mobility and hit a few plyometric exercises before I start my training session. In a study done in 2015 by George Davies and colleagues, it was said that the purpose of plyometric training was to increase the excitability of neurological receptors for improved reactivity of the neuromuscular system, and that explosive exercises may improve the neural efficiency through enhancement of neural coordination. So this study essentially confirms to us we want to include plyometrics at the end of our warm-up to excite our nervous system. This is going to lead to better muscle firing during our training session. I gotta tell you, I personally am a big fan of this. I typically do this a lot, especially when I train legs. I do box jumps before I squat. I just feel like it just has all of those muscles firing and feeling explosive before I get under the bar. However, any mix of plyos works here. I recommend doing anywhere between 5 to 10 sets and 3 to 5 reps for each of these exercises. You wanna have high set, low reps, just for the sake of fatigue. You don't wanna fatigue while you're doing these. For you, if you're doing a speed sprint training session, my favorite thing to do to start is to do 10-yard starts. This gives me an opportunity to work on my technique and my start, which is one of the most important parts of running like a 40, especially a shorter race. For variety, I would like to add like hurdle hops or fast feet. Something that gets you doing a vertical jump, I think, is also a good movement to start with, and it just makes you feel explosive, and more of like a frequency based where you're moving your feet really fast is also good for stride frequency, I think. Also, before I forget, I have a bonus tip for you, and that's to visualize. Visualize yourself doing your training session, doing your race, whatever you're doing. Visualize yourself doing it to the best of your ability. Visualize yourself succeeding, and visualize yourself just feeling, and kind of think of yourself as giving yourself the feeling of success. I think this is something that it gets overlooked. It's a mental thing. I know a lot of athletes, I think, that are successful do this, and they do it without even thinking. They just see themselves as just being successful.
How do you actually kind of see it all happening and kind of break it down as you go?
The days before the game, you have to dream about that. You have to think about that, like I joke around all the time, even when you're with girls, you have to think about making those big time plays.
That's what you're thinking about when you're out with girls?
Yeah.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
What do they think about that?
They just giggle, but I think they understand me a little bit more.
My advice for this one is just try it, see if you like it. So there you have it. Those are my best recommendations for warming up for a sprint speed training session or some kind of combine or showcase where you gotta run like a 40 or a 60. So that's it for this video. If you have a topic that you'd like me to discuss in a future video, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Thank you again for watching, and be sure to subscribe to my channel so you get a notification on the next video of this sprint speed training series. To be honest, I feel like the word acclimated just is so used, and I feel like everyone uses it for lack of a better word to use in that situation.